everybody, I'm KC, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About, and a happy non-denominational winter festivus to you all. Oh wait, that joke doesn't work for Australians. Ah well, it's that time of year again, the holiday season has come at last, and being a naively optimistic person, I love everything about celebrating Christmas, a sentiment I expressed in last year's Christmas Countdown video. Well, this year, we're doing it again, but on a more specific topic. Do you recall this? 2. No versions of A Christmas Carol, because that's a different list. Yeah, that. We're gonna do that. Say what you want about the holiday season, but I've yet to meet anyone who doesn't love the classic Charles Dickens tale in one form or another. After all, great stories like A Christmas Carol stand the test of time and get told over and over and over again for a reason. And A Christmas Carol has been adapted countless times in all sorts of, let's say, unique ways. Everyone has their favorite, and I have mine. But what would be fun about me just talking about one version of A Christmas Carol? So today, we're going to cover some more ground and talk about my top 5 favorite versions of A Christmas Carol. Just to clarify, these are not the best adaptations out there. Some of them are, but not all of them. These are just the ones that I love and have grown attached to the most over the years. So if you don't see the Muppet version on here, which you won't, that's pretty much why. And like I said, there are tons of versions of this classic tale through every form of media imaginable, and naturally, I haven't seen all of them. So if one of your favorites isn't on here, it's possible I just haven't seen it. You want to share your favorite versions? Be my guest in the comments, but for now, let's dive into my top 5 favorite Christmas Carol adaptations. My top 5? Number 5. Doctor Who, A Christmas Carol. Okay. None of you are allowed to say anything if you haven't seen it. This is why I wanted to do a list of Christmas Carol specials, so I could talk about all sorts of different ways of adapting it. Chances are, if a TV show runs long enough, they'll get to doing their own take on A Christmas Carol eventually. And there have been some weird attempts at this, but I think everyone around my age has a favorite of these, and for me, it's Doctor Who's Christmas Carol. Frankly, I'm surprised it took the time travel show over 4 decades to do their own take on this, but here we are. Say what you want about Matt Smith's run of Christmas episodes, but you can't say they don't try to embrace the season in whatever weird shenanigans they get wrapped up in. This was the first Christmas special that does this, and it's pretty refreshing. Especially because it's not another freaking invasion in present-day London. The episode is not a note-for-note adaptation of the story, but rather the Doctor uses the story as a template to help turn a selfish old man named Kazran Stardick into a good man, so he'll help save a crashing space shuttle. Kinda like the All Dogs Christmas Carol, but with less singing. Not a word of the original dialogue from the book is spoken, the ghosts are just a Doctor and his friends, and, well, it takes place on a far-off steampunk planet where there are fish in the clouds. It's Doctor Who, don't question it. But what works about this special is how it uses the ideas behind the classic story to create something all its own, with its own characters, ideas, and emotions tied to it. Following the idea of what the ghost did in A Christmas Carol is just a creative and entertaining way to solve the problem and save the day. It's a really clever framing device. It even has a great twist on the Ghost of Christmas Future that I will not spoil. Matt Smith is in top form as always, with one of the best entrances the Doctor has ever made.
Ah. Yes. Blimey. Sorry. Christmas Eve on a rooftop. Saw a chimney. My whole brain just went, what the hell?
And Michael Gambon is probably the most memorable one-off character from one of the Christmas specials. Kazran is literally completely transformed from what he was at the beginning of the story, and through every twist and turn as the Doctor interferes with Kazran's life with good and bad results, it's marvelously performed. The only real problem with it is the episode has to break a few of the show's most fundamental rules on time travel in order for the story to work. And while I can see why that would annoy fans because that is a problem, it doesn't really bother me as much as it honestly probably should. Really, I can forgive the neglect for the rules of the show on some level if the story works despite it, and if it doesn't affect the show in the long run, which are both criteria this episode meets. As far as putting you through the emotional ringer as you watch a man's life and internal transformation, and giving you that warm fuzzy feeling when it's all over and you're ready to celebrate the holiday season, Doctor Who's A Christmas Carol is not only worthy of its title, despite not being a strict remake of the original story, but it's probably the best Christmas special Doctor Who has released so far, with an interesting location, a stellar cast, and some hauntingly beautiful music. It's a unique spin on a tale that, even for a time traveler, stands the test of time. Number 4. A Christmas Carol 2004. This version is a Hallmark movie production, hear me out, that is an adaptation of a very successful stage musical that had yearly engagements at Madison Square Garden from 1994 to 2003. Has your high school put on a musical production of A Christmas Carol? Chances are it was this one. You know, I'm surprised there aren't more musical adaptations of this story. The Muppet one is probably the most well-known, and some of those TV versions we talked about have done that, but when I found this version composed by Disney's golden boy, Alan Menken, it seemed like a match made in heaven, and it really is. Now, before I say what I really like about this version, I need to get some of my criticism out of the way first. Mainly that, production-wise, this version is cheap. I know this was a made-for-TV movie, and Hallmark does produce about 9,000 of these things each Christmas, but just because this is based on a stage show, doesn't mean it has to look like one. The sets are nice, especially the London streets, but then there are sections like the Ghost of Christmas Future scene that probably looked better on the stage. I mean, sheesh, this is the brightest ominous graveyard I've ever seen. There are one or two other issues I have with this version, but who cares? Let's get to the good stuff, like the casting. The TV version stars Kelsey Grammer, which was a pretty great choice for a musical Scrooge, and the cast overall is a great group with amazing voices. All the ghosts give some of my favorite performances in the movie. I mean, you really can't go wrong with Jane Krakowski, Geraldine Chaplin, also known as Charlie Chaplin's daughter. Maybe that's why they cast her as a ghost with no lines. And the Ghost of Christmas Present, wait a second, is that Detective Joe West? It is! Okay, I didn't start watching The Flash until this year, so I never noticed this before, but if you want to hear more of Jesse L. Martin's delightful voice, this will give you your fill.
I'd pay good money to see you singing and dancing.
But the best thing about this version, and the thing that keeps me coming back every year, is the music. Of course, Alan Menken is an expert in his craft, but the lyrics and story were done by Lynn Ahrens? Sorry, I'm bad at names, who also wrote the lyrics to the recent Anastasia musical. Now, I know there have been other musical versions of A Christmas Carol, but as far as song quality, this is the best I've seen. This story is an emotional roller coaster, and the music follows along with the journey and highlights each character's emotional strength. From the cheerful, to the sardonic, to the nostalgic, to the foreboding, there's not really a bad tune to be found here, and it's one of those soundtracks that makes great use of its reprises. Probably the most well-known song from this version, though, is A Place Called Home, where Scrooge observes his younger self in a loving duet with his girlfriend Emily, played in this version by Jennifer Love Hewitt.
When I finally found my way to a place called home and to life with you.
I'm learning more that having Scrooge join in on songs with the visions of his past is not as uncommon in other musical versions as I thought it was when I first saw this, but I still think it's the most effective song I've seen do this. The Ghost of Christmas Past segment should have elements of looking back on events with a different perspective, and this song has Scrooge watching his younger self prepare for a blissful and loving life that will never come. It conveys both hope and regret, and when he joins in with them, it just breaks your heart. Each song has something to evolve the story and emphasize the emotions of the characters, and I cannot get enough of it. This version has faults that do bother me, but none of that is present from the cast or the music. And that's what keeps me coming back. So if you're a hopeless musical nerd like I am, this is a very fun way to ring in the holidays. Number 3. Disney's A Christmas Carol 2009. Now this is a fascinating entry, because this is something that really shouldn't have worked as well as it did. I find people get almost frustrated how faithful this adaptation turned out to be, mostly because of the few moments where it goes a bit off the rails. In fact, I think this was the first movie where I walked into the theater skeptical about if it was going to be good, and sitting there waiting for it to prove me wrong. I mean, think about it. Disney's A Christmas Carol starring Jim Carrey as Scrooge and all the ghosts, and animated in that weird motion capture animation that they don't seem to do anymore, which thank God. But somehow, by some bizarre cosmic phenomenon, this works. It's not only one of the most faithful adaptations I've seen, it's one of the best. I know Jim Carrey is capable of being a serious dramatic actor, but I think we all rolled our eyes when we heard about his part in this movie, waiting for the impending train wreck of cognitive dissonance. But one thing you cannot deny about Carrey is that he never half-asses a performance. No matter who he's playing in this movie, he gives it his all, and it works amazingly well. He absolutely nails Scrooge, from the selfish miser loner, to the sniveling coward, to the regret-ridden old man, to the generous and giddy, rejuvenated old soul. Towards the end, Carrie's voice work gets a bit over the top and you can start to tell that it's him, but it fits what the character is feeling by that point in the story. He really loses himself in the role, and it's magnificent to watch. He gives each of the ghosts distinct personality and pretty unique voices. Well, except for Christmas Future, but he's always sort of been the silent type. I wasn't watching this thinking, oh, it's Jim Carrey doing a voice. He really embodies the nature of these characters. The rest of the cast are excellent choices and do great work as well. As far as casting, there's really not a weak link to be found here. And the animation and atmosphere they create is wonderful. I'm one of those people who's never been crazy about this motion capture animation that Robert Zemeckis was doing for a while, but this is definitely the best looking movie out of that group. They really take full advantage of the technology while remembering to create a stylized world around it, so it doesn't have that uncanny valley effect that movies like Polar Express did. It really gives the magical vibe that this story should, and some of the more otherworldly concepts in the book can be realized at least somewhat with the leap in technology. It's why people love animation in the first place. From elaborate camera work to unique character designs, it's clear a lot of thought and care went into it. It really is bizarre how accurate this adaptation is at times. Most of the dialogue is direct quotes from the book. It recreates the more magical scenes that other adaptations may have had more difficulty with. It's really impressive. With that said, I think the thing that frustrates people about this movie is how close it gets to the source material most of the time, but then it goes off on these weird tangents for the sake of spectacle or cheap slapstick. It has some really silly moments in it, and suddenly we spend 5 minutes of what should be the most dramatic sequence in the story in a chase scene around London. But at least it looked cool. I understand that that's distracting to some, and even I find myself fast forwarding through some parts to get to the good stuff, but the good stuff is really, really good. From the wholesome scenes celebrating what's wonderful about the season, to the dramatic and somber moments that beautifully capture the tragedy that is in this story, sometimes in very unique ways, Disney's A Christmas Carol was an unexpected surprise. It's not perfect, but I think it got a lot closer to that than I think anyone expected it to. It's phenomenally animated, beautifully performed, and a very well-made retelling of this classic tale. Number 2. Mickey's Christmas Carol. We all have our first version of A Christmas Carol, and for most people in this generation, it tends to either be the Muppets version or this one. I'll give you 3 guesses which one was mine. The funny thing is that I didn't know this was based on a famous Christmas story until a couple years after I saw it. And I saw this for the first time when I was about 7 or 8 years old when it was paired with the TV special, Mickey's Magical Christmas Snowed In at the House of Mouse. Weirdly enough, even if it may not be an accurate interpretation of A Christmas Carol, I think this version is what made me fall in love with the story even before I read the original. Because even though there may not be many quotes from the book, they cut a lot out for the sake of time, and it does still have some of the silly nature that came with Disney cartoons, especially at the time, it still captures the spirit of the source material without relying on being accurate at every turn. What do I mean by the spirit of the source material? Because I've used that phrasing before. Well, I don't think an adaptation has to be a perfect recreation of the original material. What matters is that they understand what makes the characters stand the test of time, even if their versions may be a bit different, and if the way they're telling the story can bring similar emotional reactions from the viewer. And that is exactly what Mickey's Christmas Carol does. Scrooge McDuck is obviously perfect for the part, and the late great Alan Young gives what I consider his best performance as a character, but who they picked to play all the other characters fits like pieces of a puzzle. The only exception to that to me was Goofy as Marley. I thought that was a really weird choice, but I guess I had to stick Goofy in there somewhere. But my personal favorite was casting Jiminy Cricket as the Ghost of Christmas Past. That is right up there with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark as one of the most perfect casting choices ever. And even if they do cut out a lot of details in the story, most notably Scrooge's sister, and the overall feel is a lot more innocent than the original story, they don't shy away from the most important emotional moments. My favorite part is when we get to the Ghost of Christmas Future segment. Usually the scene takes place at Cratchit's house as we see the family mourn the loss of Tiny Tim, but here it's in the graveyard where Mickey Mouse, one of the most beloved cartoon characters of all time, is crying over the grave of his youngest son. Holy crap! Who says animated movies don't have the guts to go dark? And not a word is spoken by Cratchit Mickey in this moment. All of his heartbreak is conveyed through the music and animation, and it's incredibly effective. Even the moment where Scrooge realizes his fate as he's pulled into his own grave as he pleads to the spirit that he can change, it's pretty terrifying. While Mickey's Christmas Carol is not a perfect retelling of the classic story, it tells it in a way that is capable of getting the same emotional responses from the viewer, especially from kids. All done with the endearing Disney cast we know and love, playing iconic parts through endearing performances and gorgeous, vibrant animation, especially for the time. This special has held up so well for me over the years, and watching it reminds me of why I love this festive story in the first place. And my number one favorite Christmas Carol adaptation is A Christmas Carol, 1951. Of course it's the Alastair Sim version. How could it not be the Alastair Sim version? See, here's the thing. When people are asked what the best version of A Christmas Carol is, it's either this version or the George C. Scott one. And don't get me wrong, the George C. Scott version is great and was a contender for this list, but I've only seen it once and didn't think I could properly convey what makes it so memorable. This version, on the other hand, is a Christmas tradition in my house. It's not the most accurate version, but it's everything I love about the story. Alastair Sim is the best Scrooge brought to film. That's not me being subjective, that's just a fact. But honestly, there's a lot about this version that I could gush about for hours. So for this entry, I'm going to keep my praises to one factor that I think this version pulls off better than any other. Most of the adaptations we've covered either shine when it came to accuracy, but started to crack when they diverged from it, or told the story their own way while keeping the basic concept as an outline. But where this version excels is how it perfectly balances what it has and what it changes. Many lines are pulled straight from the book and performed with the optimism and poignancy that is expected from this tale, but it gets elevated even further from what this version does differently. It doesn't really change elements from the story so much as adds a bunch of stuff. Scrooge is more distant in his interactions rather than outright mean. Even before we get his backstory, you can tell that this is a man who is using cold, greedy remarks to help deal with a world that hasn't been very kind to him. I'm not sure if this was the directing or the acting, but it adds more dimension to the character than I've seen in most adaptations. Even the smallest additions add more personality to these characters, like Scrooge's miserly tendencies applying even to himself.
More bread. Take me extra, sir. No more bread.
However, most of the additions are in the Ghost of Christmas Past section. After that, it remains pretty faithful, but boy did they stick a lot more stuff in here, like watching Scrooge and Marley's business evolve and Fezziwig's business crumble, Scrooge not visiting Marley on his deathbed until after business hours, which says a lot about his mindset at the time, but my absolute favorite, and one of my favorite moments in any version of A Christmas Carol ever, is with Scrooge's sister Fan. In the book, and most adaptations, we're just told what happened to his sister, but here, we see it. And everything about the scene is just remarkable. Fan tries to ask Scrooge to promise her something, but she falls silent. Thinking she's died, Scrooge's whole demeanor changes. Without saying a single word, and even just from the way he looks at his newborn nephew as he walks out, it's almost like you're seeing the moment his heart turned so cold and he turned his back on the world. That would be powerful enough on its own, but then
Ebenezer, promise me you'll take care of my boy. Promise me you'll take care of my...
The thing about the Ghost of Christmas Past segment is that while it is important to the viewer to show us how this miserable old man became who he is, and on some level it helps give Scrooge perspective on who he used to be, you could argue that it's pretty superfluous for Scrooge himself.
There's no point in bringing me down memory lane when I already remember all this crap!
But this is something that most adaptations, including the book, have not done, showing Scrooge something from his past that he didn't know. If that is the moment that Scrooge became so cold, then it makes the realization that he left before he could hear what Fan asked of him all the more tragic. And every implication it brings, not the least of which being how he has treated his nephew all these years, does what the Ghost of Christmas Past section should. Add perspective on life-changing moments in the past. And it does it in the best way I have seen any version do this. This version of A Christmas Carol doesn't rely on being accurate to tell its story, nor does it warp the story to fit its own identity. It's a beautiful representation of Charles Dickens' original story while creating new moments with almost seamless writing and phenomenal performances from one of the best casts an adaptation has had that enhances the material they were already given rather than bog it down. And that, my friends, is an adaptation done right, and why this is my all-time favorite version of A Christmas Carol. But again, these are the ones that I love the most, the ones that I come back to every year and have the most sentimentality to me. If you think I missed any and want to share some of the versions closest to your heart, let me know in the comments. But in the meantime, I wish you all a happy and safe holiday filled with warmth and joy. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.